All right, you are looking live. 28 Pittsburgh Street in beautiful Columbiana, Ohio, the nicest place in America. Right, David? The heart of it all. The Reagan Revolution. Reaganomics, the national debt. We left off yesterday with the maybe surprising news to you that this hero, when it comes to a lot of people, when they think of, hey, what's ailing America? We got too much government intervention and people, things need to be freed up, and there's $30 trillion of debt. So then why during President Reagan's tenure in the 1980s from 81 to 89, the debt tripled? That's not a good thing. How'd that happen? Okay. Reagan had two legs to his plan, more than two legs, but two essential legs to the plan of the government's budget. One was lower taxes, which he argued, and history shows most of the time increases revenue to the government. Did we talk about that yesterday? It's counterintuitive. You would think if you raise taxes, the government gets more money. It ends up that if you lower taxes, the government ends up with more revenue. Did we get into that at all yesterday? Yes. And then the other leg was we got to cut spending. The government, the federal government, I should say more accurately, the national government is not responsible for taking care of all the needs of the country. We are called the United States of America for a reason. It's the states that have more of a responsibility for the welfare of their citizens than Washington, D.C. That's how it's supposed to be. That's foreign to you. It's foreign to me. All my life it's been like that too. But it wasn't like that the first 150 years of our country until FDR, when that switch was made, when the mindset of Americans turned to, hey, we do need the government. This is so big, the government's got to intervene. The government's got to bail us out of this. The government's the only entity we have that is so big and has the power to do this. And we've been living like that for the last 90 years, and we're $30 trillion in debt because we are basically addicted to the federal government. Or as some people would like to say, we're like little piglets at the teat of the big mama pig, the federal government. You ever seen that cartoon? Yeah. All little piglets getting the nourishment from this huge pig labeled federal government. Because they can. Because they got the most power and wherewithal to generate all that money, right? Well, Reagan's like, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Do people, are things needed to get done? Are there certain things that we need to take care of each other? Yes, state. Your governor, that's their job. That's ultimately the way it's supposed to be. We actually have a governor right now that is kind of leading the charge to try to get us back to that kind of governance, federalist government, federalism, where you got local governments, they're the closest to the situation. They should be taking care of the problems first. Then you've got state government. Furthest from your problem is Washington, D.C. They're not the ones that we should be going to first. And Florida's governor is like, hey, I'm the governor of Florida. I'll run Florida. Thank you very much. Of course, they don't like him very much, the people that are for all the federal government stuff. But the Congress was not willing to cut the spending, and there's a reason for that. That's very unpopular. Imagine if Congress came along today and said, hey, we're going to cut, we're not going to have any more Medicare. You think anybody would get elected by saying that? The federal government is not going to spend any more money on the health care for elderly. Who's getting elected saying that? Nobody, right? And I'm not saying they should. I'm saying, but you see my point. Any federal government program that's put in place that people get used to, hey, yeah, that's something the government does, you can't take it away without paying a political price. on a smaller scale, over 2020 and 2021, your family's bank accounts, 3 or 4 times the government just dropped money in their bank account. Did you know that happened? Okay, so did your families give it back? No, right? Because who would do that? Like, I would have voted, hey, that's not what we should be doing. But I didn't get the money back. I mean, if the government's going to give it, aren't you going to take it? And there's certain things that if the government is always giving it, and then you try to take it away, let's say there are some people that are pushing for, Bernie Sanders, you've heard of him, people that are that kind of thinking, they're pushing for the government always. It's called a universal basic income. They want the government to provide, the federal government, to provide a certain amount of money for everybody every month. Imagine if that ever got passed and then tried to take it away. There'd be riots, right? Yeah. Yes. Yes. But you had something to add there. Do you understand what I'm saying, Seth? Do you think it would be good if our government just gave everybody a certain income? Oh, but there's people in need. They need to, don't you care about the poor? It's hard to get Congress to stop spending because even if people that say, I don't know if that's a good idea, well, okay, you give it to me. All right, I'll vote for that guy because he's going to give us more money. That's a very hard thing to stop. And Reagan couldn't stop it. And now we've gone from less than $1 trillion to triple the debt in the 80s to now we're over 15 times that, or about 15 times what it was when I was your age. It's gone that much. What is 15 times? 1,500%. The debt has increased 1,500% since I was your age. The good news. 1981, 1982. Again, when I was your age. Reaganomics. Reagan. Oh, you guys, Reagan. You. I thought this Reagan guy was good. I thought this. 1983 comes. Boom! The economy grows like, 1982. Oh, the numbers are coming out. Oh, no. Inflation's still, unemployment's still. Oh, man. The country's not growing. Once his policies take effect, remember he said in his inaugural speech, it's not going to be days, it's not going to be weeks, it's going to take longer than months. 2 years later, boom. I mean, boom. The economy expands rapidly in America. It expands all throughout the 80s. It expands, except for a slight downturn in the early 90s when George H.W. Walker was president. Slight downturn there, and then all through the 90s, the economy continues to expand. All started by this thing that they used to make fun of and use as an insult, Reaganomics. This idea that America's approach to economics should be lower taxes, invigorate the government, get out of the way, lowering the taxes, stimulating production. When production gets higher, inflation will go down because there's more products to buy, so supply goes up, price comes down. Income up 17%. I grew up in a family where my father was a high school dropout. Many were. Some of your grandparents, you may have similar stories. My father was a high school dropout, worked in the steel mills in Youngstown after he dropped out at 16, basically because his dad died. But then just a regular factory worker. I'm not saying that as an insult, but just, and, barely working class, barely making it. We did way better in the 80s. He wasn't a Reagan fan at that time. He was a union guy. Reagan, we're going to find out, wasn't real popular with unions. But there's no way he can argue that his economic situation didn't get way better in the 80s. A high school dropout factory worker. The average income on average for Americans went up 17%. We're talking about inflation right now being at close to 10%. It's basically a 7% tax on all of our lives. The opposite. Like in spades, 17% increase in people's income throughout the 80s. Everyone's All boats were rising. Reaganomics provided an economic environment where all levels of income, the rich got richer, yeah, and that's what the certain people in politics will say, oh yeah, the rich got richer, and that's all they'll talk about in the 80s. They won't talk about my family, the working class family that did way better as well. Of course the rich got richer. Well, guess what? So did everybody else. Okay, what about things outside of domestic? When I say domestic, that's home stuff, right? American politics. What about foreign policy? We have a new thing called the Reagan Doctrine. It's new, but not totally new. We've had all of these presidents over the years, going back to Monroe, the Monroe Doctrine. We'll take care of the Western Hemisphere. Hey, Europe, you take care of your part of the world. We'll take care of this part of the world. Reagan says, here's what we're going to do. Since we're in the middle of this Cold War, any third world country, do you understand what that word means? Does everybody understand what the term third world means? It doesn't mean beyond Mars. What's third world mean? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. They are, here's how they classify. There's first, have you ever said this? Heard anybody use this phrase? First world problems. Anybody ever heard that? What's that mean? That means we, the fully developed 21st century technological, like wealthy countries, we tend to worry about things that the people in the third world. So the second world would be like developing countries. They're not quite United States or Germany or China, although not that long ago, China would have been considered a developing country. Canada's second world or first world? Third world would be Haiti. Like, they're not developing hardly at all, right? Haiti's one of the poorest countries in the world, just down there in the Caribbean. That's third world. A lot of the Central American countries back then, especially, were third world. Maybe they've risen to second world by now. Reagan says any country that the communists are going to try to take over, because, again, it's an easy selling point if you're a communist. If you're in a third world country and most of the people are poor, it's easy to get them to believe that the reason that they're poor is because of anyone in the country that has money, and there needs to be a revolution in your country that you will own all of the resources and therefore you won't be poor anymore. What they don't tell you is that you're not necessarily considered poor because no one's richer than you. You're just all sharing in the same misery. That's what communism ends up being. Okay, communism, the idea is we're going to eliminate the rich so that there won't be any more rich and poor. Well, what's going to end up happening is everybody just is in the same level, sharing in the same misery. That means no one has the opportunity to rise out of their situation. Does that make sense? But they won't. Of course, that's what I'm telling you. The truth of it is they will package it as, because they want the power and control, is that, hey, those of us down here on the income level, we need to stick it to the rich people because they're the ones that got all the advantages of the world. Isn't that right? I mean, here am I. Is it fair? Is it fair that they make way more money than I do? No, that's not fair. We need to tax them and make sure that the lower income people are taken care of. That's their selling point. The reality is, what ends up happening is everybody's equally miserable. No one's achieving. That's the end game. To them, the end game is utopia. We're all sharing, standing around singing Kumbaya because we're all the same. Really? We're all the same what? You're not all rich. Hello? Anyway, we will support either with money or military, if necessary, any of these countries that the commies are trying to take over. Well, in our own backyard, this is happening. Down here in El Salvador and Nicaragua, we've got communist uprisings taking place where America's like, hey, we already got communists in Cuba. Now we've got communists. There might be small countries, but look, they're right here. They're in our backyard. We are not going to allow communists to take over. One, remember the domino theory? Remember that? We're not going to allow the communists to take over one by one. These countries keep falling. Next thing you know, they're all around us. And now we're not just taking on the USSR, we're taking on the whole world because they've gone in and dominated. So El Salvador, we're going to help the communist rebels. I'm sorry. We're going to help the democratic government the communist rebels are trying to overthrow. Nicaragua, we're going to help the rebels. A small island in the Caribbean called Grenada. Really small island. We sent 2,000 Marines because we had some college students there to liberate that island from communist takeover because the communists were using it. You know, Russia is certainly financing a lot of these communist governments in our part of the world, and they were using this Grenada place as kind of like a base for them. A lot of it for refueling with their ships and stuff. So we said, nah, no more. So America was like, what are we doing in Grenada? I never heard of Grenada. Why are we going to this little country? Why are we like America going to war against this little? But the point was, we have to. We have to take out this strategic island they're using. I mean, it only took a few days. You guys know Clint Eastwood? There's a good Clint Eastwood movie about it. What movie? Heartbreak Ridge? I think that's choir people, gotta go. Good tidings. Hey, come here. Real quick. I don't know if you've been told this, but Mr. Mahoney needs just, encouragement in the Lord. So don't go there like you're going some pass. Go there as ambassadors of Christ. Ever hear of this place? Serenity. You heard of Afghanistan, right? Yes. So in present times, Afghanistan is a place, most recently you heard of it, where the Biden administration totally and ineptly messed up getting our final troops out of Afghanistan, which ended in that debacle that we all seen play out a few months ago. Well, in 1980, Russia invaded Afghanistan, just like they kind of did Ukraine today. And the world was like, you can't just go into a sovereign country and take it over. And Russia, of course, like they always do, so they just ignore the rest of the world and their reaction to it. So we decided not to go to the Olympics. We already covered that with Carter, right? We didn't go to the Olympics that year because of this. But we were helping a group of people called the Mujahideen against them. These are the people that were fighting against the Soviet invasion. So we're still in the Cold War. We're not fighting a war against Russia, but we're supplying the rebels in Afghanistan, or the people in Afghanistan that are fighting against the Russian takeover. Does that make sense? This becomes a big deal. We don't actually go there and fight them, God bless you. But Afghanistan in history, if you didn't pick this up when they were talking about the news last year or so, Russia ended up being there for like 10 years and never took it over. They failed. Never came. And we had our troops in Afghanistan for a long time, right? And finally, President Trump said, we got. So then, change in presidency happened. And instead of getting our troops out in a very organized, timely, safe manner, the new president took over getting our troops out. And it was an absolute disaster. And then something really tragic happened. October of 1983, America was once again trying to be the force for good in the world. We sent our troops over to Lebanon, another small country, kind of in a disarray governmentally. We're like, hey, we'll go there. And we find out that our ideals are not wanted by other people. Why are we in for so long in Iraq and Afghanistan and Lebanon? Good. Like, we want them to have the freedom that we have, right? Evidently, they don't want it. A lot of the Arab countries and people that in